I just want to take a minute to thank a couple of people. First of all, everything we do as part of FMI is really to honor the legacy of Francis McClelland, who was generous, also really an exemplar of resilience and a staunch advocate for children, youth, and families. And then it's exciting that the second person I'm going to thank is actually here live today. So thank you to Turbeville, who's joining us today. Very Thank you for your involvement and support. I'm going to turn it over to Savannah, actually, who's going to tell us a little bit about Dr.
It's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Harwood, who's a professor here at the University of Arizona in Communication. He's the author of Communication in Music and Social Interaction and Understanding Communication and Aging. He has over 150 articles and chapters on intergenerational communication and communication in music. He focuses on the communicative implications of music for relationships between people and in large social groups. So it's my pleasure to welcome him.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. Is it okay if I sit? You know, I'm lazy, so this is good. Let me see. Happy Valentine's Day to you all. I thought the bear was cute. Since I am talking about love, I figured it was okay to be a day late with Valentine's greetings. Some of the work I'm going to be talking about here came out of projects I've done with Sandy Wallace, Jinyu Chen, Farah Kadar, Steffi Kalini, and certainly there are people who over the past 3 or 4 years I've talked to a lot about music. I talk to a lot of people about music because I'm a music fan. But these are actually people who I've talked to about it in an academic sense in terms of its social implications. And in particular, I'm going to talk today primarily about 2 studies that I have done with Sandy Wallace. The first of which we did when Sandy was an undergraduate student. I took my class on communication and music, and it turned into an independent study. And Sandy is now a grad student in our program in communication. So why music for a social scientist? For most of my career, I've been interested in intergroup prejudice, intergroup relations, how groups fight with each other, stereotype each other, and just in general don't get along. And at some point, maybe 3 or so years ago, I sort of noticed that music was a place where groups often do get along. You know, it's not unusual at all to see a multiracial group of musicians playing together, doing just fine, apparently being friendly with each other. And so it seems to be a site where people overcome group boundaries, and also a site where people can model effective intergroup relations. Right? So we, as an audience member, you can see members of different groups apparently operating in quite literal harmony with one another. So that's what got me interested in music as a place, as a site of social activity. And once sort of I started thinking along those lines, I also got interested in music as a place for interpersonal relations to develop and be transformed. And there are a lot of lines of research here that sort of would suggest that music is an important place for social activity. Certainly emotions are important to us as human beings, right? And music is one of the places where we experience the most intense emotional experiences, or some of the most intense emotional experiences. Music is also a very common site for parent-infant interaction. So mothers and fathers sing to their babies universally, right? Across all cultures, that sort of singing of lullabies and singing of songs to young infants is a very common phenomenon. Music is common in rituals. We, across cultures, get married with music. We come of age with music. Music surrounds all sorts of important societal rituals. Everything from, you know, the coronation of a king or a queen to the Super Bowl. We've got to have, you know, the songs sung before the Super Bowl, and then you've got to have the crappy halftime show. You've got to have the whole thing, right? Music is part of all kinds of societal rituals. Yeah, go ahead.
Yep. An interpersonal connection here. I need
Yeah.
chairs for the speakers. Sorry, Kate.
So long as you do it in a rhythmic manner.
I'll hands. I'll move some stuff like that. Excuse me.
Music is universal. So all cultures have music. It differs a lot from one culture to another, but it's a universal phenomenon. And music also has a very long history of human, there's a long history of human music making. This is a flute that was discovered in a cave in Germany, and it's been dated to about 36,000 years ago. So that's not when we started making music, obviously. This is the oldest musical artifact that we have, but you don't start making music by building a flute. People obviously were making music long before this, during times when we were living in caves, when we were being eaten by wild animals, when we were living awful and short and painful lives. We still found time to make flutes out of animal bones and to make music with one another. This, for us as social scientists, this should tell us that music is serving some really important social functions for us. It's not just oh well, let's sit down and listen to some Eminem because we feel like it right now. So there are a lot of reasons to be interested in music as a social phenomenon. As a communication scientist, I'm sort of interested in a lot of the different pathways of musical communication. So if you think about it, musical audience members communicate with one another. Whenever we're listening to music, we talk to people who we're listening to it with. We might dance with those people, so there's nonverbal communication between people when they're listening to music. We might sing along, so there's musical communication. Musicians also communicate with one another, obviously, right? How many of you are musicians of even an amateur form? Okay, quite a few. Yeah, that's me. Right? Very, very amateur. Yeah. But if you play with other people, right, there's very intense musical communication that has to occur because you've got to stay in time with one another. You've got to stay maybe on pitch with one another. You've got to sometimes talk about what you're playing so that you all understand sort of the big picture of what's going on. So there's lots of communication between musicians, and there's lots of communication between musicians and audience members. The reason we go to see bands play or see artists play and not just listen to them on our iPhones is seeing music happening involves communication between the musician and the audience members, right? We learn something about the music from seeing people perform it, from their nonverbal and sometimes even their verbal behaviors. Same applies to composers, right? Not all music has a composer that is separate from the musician, but in cases where it is, those composers will often communicate their desires and intent to the musician. So I'm also interested so broadly in this idea that there are a lot of different pathways of communication that surround what you might think of as this sort of isolated little bubble of a musical event. So that's all sort of background. So now I want to talk about a couple of studies we've done that focus on sort of a rather specific slice of this, and largely with the sort of communication up in the top box there between audience members. And in particular, sort of the global picture that I've been investigating in these recent studies is whether engaging in musical activity with other individuals can shape, inform, influence, perhaps make better our interpersonal relationships. And there are a few sort of mechanisms or reasons why this might be. Firstly, when we play or listen to music, there are physiological effects that it has on us. In particular, oxytocin is a common physiological response to music, And most of you probably know oxytocin is a hormone that's associated with close interpersonal relationships, with sometimes called the love hormone. I don't do physio stuff at all, but that's one mechanism, right, where music could lead to oxytocin release, which could lead to feeling closer or more connected to other individuals. Some of those nonverbal behaviors that I briefly alluded to a couple of minutes ago, right? When we play music together, certainly we have to look at one another. It's very difficult to play music with someone else if you're not engaging in some degree of mutual gaze, for instance. If we're dancing with someone, it's quite likely that we will touch them. It's certainly likely that we will be looking at them. So there's a lot of nonverbal behaviors that incidentally are associated with relational closeness. Touch is obviously associated with closeness. So some of those phenomena might lead to closer interpersonal relationships with other people. The bottom two are the ones that I'm really interested in. And so another thing that occurs when we play music or listen to music with other individuals is we become synchronized with them. We become coordinated with them. If you're playing music, quite literally, you have to be synchronized and coordinated because that's what music kind of is. If you're dancing with someone, you are obviously synchronized with them. Even something as simple as singing along to a song together. You are, by definition of the fact that you are both singing along to the same song, you are synchronized and coordinated. And probably a lot of you know that synchronization is associated with liking, with affection for other individuals through various mechanisms, right? If you're behaving similarly to one another, if you're mirroring each other's movements, or if you're walking in time with someone else, there are similarity attraction kind of phenomena that occurs. You feel more similar to the other person. There's some really interesting work on self-other identity overlap. So you start to view the other person as kind of interchangeable with yourself when you behave in a very synchronized or coordinated way with him. So that's associated with liking. The other thing that happens if you are listening or playing music with someone else is that you are experiencing emotion with them. And you're probably experiencing similar emotion with them. So if you're listening to a sad song together, you're both experiencing those sad emotions that come along with that sad song. If you're listening to a happy song, same thing, right? So we could expect that engaging in musical activity might be associated with increased empathy and increased understanding that this person who you're with is experiencing similar emotions to you. So those are some of the mechanisms that I think might, we hypothesize, might lead to increased liking, increased relational closeness when people engage in musical activity together. Stop me at any time, by the way. I've got a few slides here, but I don't have to get through all of them. So if there are things you want to find out more about, or you have questions, just shout. Those last two, by the way, have interesting connections to specific musical phenomena, right? So synchronization, coordination, when listening to music is associated with the beat of music, with the rhythms of music, with the tempo of music, those sort of structural aspects of music. Yeah?
So, Dr. Harwood, I have two questions. The
Yeah.
first question is specific to the type of music. What if the music you played is liked by one person but hated by the other person?
Yeah.
So this is question first. The second question is that, is it possible that the interpersonal liking and the relationship closeness predict the mediator or the predictor, whatever? Because linking back to the example you shared, the dancing example, if I can select, I will run into the person who I feel most attractive to dance with him. So the synchrony is because I already like the person instead of the music it played. So,
Yeah, and you know, you're foreshadowing limitation that I'll talk about later. But the studies that we have right now are correlational studies, and so certainly that's a concern. One of our plans long term is to do some experimental work so that we can actually, have the musical activity precede the measures of association. But that's a really good point. I think the issue of, none of this works if it's music that one of the people hates. So part of sort of, and the first study I'm going to talk about is musical activity in parent-child relationships, where there's an awful lot of scope for there to be music that one person hates, right? The child likes death metal, and the parent likes sort of early 70s Led Zeppelin, and they're not too dissimilar to one another, but there's not a lot of overlap there. So yeah, there's a lot of for these processes to work, you definitely probably need to start with some shared common musical ground that both people like. So synchronization associated with things like beat, rhythm, right, the temporal properties of music. Empathy is associated obviously with the emotional content of music, which typically doesn't come in rhythm and beat and those kind of musical phenomena. It comes in things like melody, harmony, and the expressive characteristics of music. So changes in dynamic contrast in the volume of music, or very subtle changes in sort of tuning, for instance, of a particular note that you're playing. So the emotional content and the synchronization of the temporal characteristics of music are somewhat distinct. So there's connections between distinguishing synchronization and empathy and specific musical characteristics. So how we looked at this, like I said, we were looking at parent-child relationships initially, and there's a very brief rundown of the study that we did. So we looked at college students' retrospective reports, so all this is retrospective, of musical activity with their parents in early childhood, ages 6 to 13, and also in adolescence, ages 14 and above. We looked at, so they reported all kinds of, I'll talk about specific musical activities in just a second. They also reported on their current feelings of coordination with the parent when they do tasks together. So when you're doing something with your parent, how much do you feel like you are in sync with them, for instance? And we looked at reports of empathy. So when we had people sort of think back to the last time they sort of saw their parent, pick one parent, they saw that parent experiencing an emotional response to something. And we asked them, how much did you feel that same emotional response, for instance? We got a number of reports of overall relationship quality with the parent. So how much do you feel close to the parent, these kind of things. They all behaved identically to one another. I've got no idea why we measured 5 different aspects of relational quality. They were totally redundant. But sometimes you don't want to put all your eggs in one basket. But we had 5 baskets. That was too many baskets. And we looked at retrospective reports of non-musical activities during the same period of time. So one thing we wanted to control for was just, if you do a lot of stuff with the parent and some of that is musical, that's, then maybe the music is not special. We wanted to look to see if music was special, so we measured things like how much do you play board games with your parent? How much did you go to the mall with your parents? How much did you go hiking with your parent, for instance, during those same periods of time, early childhood and adolescence? I don't know if you can read this. Sorry. Here's some of the musical activities we looked at. So, and we did factor analyses on these, and we got nice factor structures, both for the retrospective reports during early childhood and adolescence, and the same factor structures. We got a factor we called casual musical engagement, which was things like singing songs while you're doing stuff around the house, singing along to music in the car, dancing to music around the house. casual types of musical engagement that all of us engage in probably fairly frequently. And then we looked at more structured or formal musical engagement, like actually playing instruments together in an orchestra or a band, or singing together in an organized choir kind of setting. Okay, so we have these two factors of musical engagement. Everyone good so far? A rough idea of what we were up to here? Okay. So we looked at mediated or indirect effects from musical activity through coordination and synchronization, and also empathy, I'll get to in a second, into, I can put that there right now, why not? So from musical activity, those structured and casual musical activities, through interpersonal coordination and empathy, to feelings of having a stronger relationship with the parent, and controlling for, in all of these, the non-musical activities. So we're looking at the sort of value added of engaging in musical activities over and above engaging in non-musical activities. And for the non-statisticians, we found really strong support for both of these, especially for the pathway through coordination or synchronization. A little less so for the pathway through empathy. For those of you who like numbers, these are the indirect effects, bootstrapped confidence intervals for the indirect effects. And you can see we get, in general, stronger effects for the coordination or synchronization variable than for the empathy variable. We also got stronger effects for during adolescence than for the reports of musical activity during early childhood. This particular output you're looking at here is for the QRI, the quality of relationships inventory, is the dependent variable. But like I said before, we got really pretty much identical effects for all of our measures of relational closeness. We suspect we're getting stronger effects during adolescence because musical activity earlier in childhood maybe is just sort of ubiquitous, that parents and kids engage in a lot of musical activity. They sing songs together, you know, they do musical games and stuff. Early in childhood, there's very little in the way of sort of musical games or singing along together in adolescence, unless you share some musical tastes, which you referred to earlier, you know, or, I don't know, right, you got less, parent-child musical activity in adolescence, I would suggest, is probably rarer, and so therefore, when it occurs, it's probably has a more powerful effect. So that was study one. I think that's all I have to say about study one. That's all I have to say about study one. Any questions on that before? So the second study we did looks at, instead of looking at parent-child relationships, we're looking at friendships and romantic relationships, but following a very similar kind of paradigm. Again, we're looking at synchronization as a mediator and quality of relationships as an outcome. We're also looking to see whether this mediator of synchronization has effects directly on specific communication behaviors. So as someone from communication, again, by the way, both these studies I'm doing with Sandy Wallace in the comm department. As people interested in communication, we're interested in whether there's some link between the musical activities, the kind of interpersonal synchronization that I've already talked about, and particular communication behaviors. So if synchronization is associated with affection, you should also see couples, friends, or romantic partners expressing that affection to one another more. And that might be a mediator for the ultimate sort of strength of the relationship. There's a degree of trust involved in playing music together, listening to music together, dancing to music together, right? If you've ever done sort of, you know, the kind of formal ballroom dancing, there's a lot of trust involved there where you hope the other person is not stepping on your foot. When you're singing with someone else, there's a lot of trust in you're sort of laying yourself out there a little bit, right? And and certainly if you're playing music with someone else, you're putting all your faith in them playing the right notes, because otherwise you are going to sound horrible even if you are playing all the right notes. So we thought that trust element might be associated with the willingness to self-disclose in relationships. And obviously the kind of empathic stuff that I was talking about earlier, there might be an association with empathic listening, with an ability to kind of intuit the other person's feelings without having to talk about them all the time through some of that shared musical activity. So we're looking here at a slightly more complicated mediated model with two sequential mediators. All right. Yeah.
So I guess whenever I first started like hearing this at the study, I was thinking that synchronization would be like a moderator, so in the context of like different levels of synchronization, so high versus low. I kind of was thinking about that more contextual way, I guess. But I definitely I was thinking more of like moderated mediation, I guess, but now seeing it like this, it seems like the two steps that you have now.
Yeah, I think the moderating effect might go back to that idea of whether you both like the same music, for instance, where, you know, if you don't really like the music, then, you know, maybe you're not synchronized with one another, and then you're not going to see these kind of effects. So I can absolutely see that it could be a moderator, and probably if we looked at this experimentally, it might be something that we would manipulate. There is some really cool experimental work where, you know, people will manipulate, they'll have an experimental confederate who will deliberately sort of, you know, so you're playing drums together and the confederate will deliberately play off the beat, right, and play it wrong. And, you know, guess what? People don't like that confederate at the end of the study. Not terribly insightful, but you know, it speaks to that idea that you do need to be synchronized with one another in order for these kind of things to be effective. So I think thinking of it as a moderator would be an alternative way of approaching it. All right, so roughly the same paradigm. We're not dealing here with the retrospective accounts way back into your childhood or anything. We're looking at your current relationship, either your friendship or your romantic relationship. What kinds of musical activities do you engage in with either your friend or your romantic partner? How much do you feel synchronized or coordinated with that person? How much do you engage in affectionate communication, mutual self-disclosure, and empathic listening with that person? And again, reports of relational quality. We learned our lesson and just had one measure of relational quality here, Rusbolt's measure of commitment. This is super hot off the press, and therefore may be wrong. You know, there's always that. We got these data about 3 weeks ago, so we're just digging into it. The reports of musical activity, interestingly, don't factor out in quite the same way as in the previous study. We seem to have something like 5 factors of different types of musical activity that friends and romantic partners engage in. I'm just going to talk about the two sort of what seem to be the most important factors. One of them is just listening to music together, casually, singing along together in the car, talking about music also comes out in a number of these analyses and doesn't seem to be distinct. I think when we first put together sort of a scale of kinds of musical activities, we sort of thought that talking about music might end up as its own thing, but it seems to just sort of wash into listening to music together, talking about music, seem to just all collapse together. We did get what looks like a pretty strong factor for attending live musical events, which perhaps with a college student population and their friends and romantic partners, it makes sense why that might fall into its own category. So going to bars, going to restaurants, going to festivals, going to concerts, and talking about those things. What do we find? So this is looking at friends. We had 150 people who reported on friendships. And we find pretty good support for these indirect effects from the shared music listening factor, through synchronization, through expressing affectionate communication, to committing to the relationship. So these are the top coefficients and confidence intervals, nice effects. Same thing for mutual self-disclosure. Same thing for empathic listening. I'm not putting all the numbers up because I told you I was lazy, right? These are all significant indirect effects. Same thing for the attending live musical factor. Same kinds of indirect effects, and significant for all three of our communication variables. So, and again, this is controlling for non-musical activities. So that looks great. With romantic partners, for the shared music listening factor, we have absolutely nothing. For the attending live music factor, we have an indirect effect through affectionate communication. We have a marginal effect through self-disclosure, and we have no effect through empathic listening. So globally, we have lots and lots of effects. Everything was significant for friendships. Very little really going on with romantic partners. Right? Sometimes it's interesting when you don't find what you expect, because that means you've got stuff to talk about. We do have a slightly smaller N with romantic partners, so we have less power there, but I don't think that's what's going on, because there really was just virtually nothing going on here. Yeah?
What kind of romantic relationships were they in? Were they casually dating, seriously dating? Were they living together? Did they have kids together?
These are college students, so probably not many of them have kids. We asked them to talk about, we asked them if they were in a romantic relationship where they'd been close to the other person for at least 3 months. So, they were relatively stable, but not necessarily highly committed relationships. Across all of these, the pathway without the communication variable, what we looked at in the first study with parent-child communication, remains significant and is, in most cases, stronger than the pathway through the communication variable. So, right, if you want to think about it this way, it's this pathway from this to synchronization, direct to relational commitment. So skipping over these communication variables, which I was kind of interested in this communication scholar, right? The communication variable, it's important. It mediates some of the effects that are going on, but the pathway without it remains stronger and probably more consistent across all of these analyses. Why do we get more effects for friends than for romantic partners? I've got one idea, but I'll be happy to take your suggestions. If we think about synchronization and we think about, we didn't measure empathy directly here, but we measured empathic listening. If you think about opportunities for dyads to experience both synchronization and simultaneously something highly emotional, I would say that romantic partners have opportunities for that. Sex, for instance, might be one that jumps to mind. Jump to my mind. Maybe that's just me looking like, why is he talking about sex? Right, sex is an activity where you are synchronized with one another and where you experience, hopefully, some emotions with one another. Fingers crossed. And friends typically don't do that. At least, maybe I'm old-fashioned. So there are perhaps other routes for this to happen for romantic partners, where for friends, going out and listening to a concert may be the peak of your opportunities for synchronization and emotional experience.
Were most of the friend dyads same-sex and most of the romantic partners heterosexual?
That's a really good question, and one that I cannot answer right now. But
seems like that would explain it right there.
In what sense?
Well, if you've got same-sex dyads, you've got a whole lot more similarity, especially at that relatively young age, these are young relationships.
Yeah.
So it's going to be easier to sync up with someone who shares your gender than someone who's not.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of what's cool about heterosexual relationships. They're actually harder to sync.
Right, it's true.
And especially at that young age and young relationship.
That's a really good question. So we should control for sex here, or control for dyad composition.
Yeah.
Do you have like anonymous exposure to commerce
Mhm.
I like the music, shared music, I'm thinking it can be a proxy for just how much you're exposed to each other. Oh, Melissa,
Yeah,
Corinne, you remember the Spotify, my Spotify
Yes,
analysis?
yes, that's very relevant.
So I am interested in this, and at the end of the year, I don't know who has Spotify, but the rankings are your top songs for 2018, whatever year.
Yeah.
And so my ex-boyfriend shared, I was like, hey, send me yours. And I did like a rank correlation analysis, and it was highly correlated. And now we've been apart for a year, and I'm like, hey, send it to me. And it's like a longitudinal case study. But then I'm thinking it's like the proximity, it's a measure of proximity, and now I'm wondering if it's going to be more divergent. Because I feel like there's something special going on, and I think there's more meaning making going on with music. I feel like in these couples.
And if a lot of these friends or roommates and romantic partners, they see each other twice a week.
Yeah. So I think proximity, exposure, and like meaning making is very interesting.
Yeah,
to think about.
that's really interesting.
Yeah.
You know, our control for doing non-musical activities together captures perhaps some of that, right? So again, we're controlling for things like when you play board games or go out to eat together or cook dinner together or, you know, you do those other things. But yeah, that doesn't control for some of the more broader stuff you're talking about.
And it doesn't control for the comparison of the two dyad types because they're separate analyses.
Yeah.
So it's irrelevant to that question.
And so the non-musical activity should play in a way that like you're keeping music playing during, because like cooking dinner, you're coming on.
Yeah.
So like, you know, music, I was trying to think of like the non-musical things. It's not like you're making music together, it's like it's making races to their real life.
Yeah, we didn't ask them, you know, how often do you go out to eat together at restaurants where there is no music playing.
Right. Yeah. So I'm like trying to think of a time where that's like not the case, and
Yeah, right, and you're right, when people cook dinner together, they may well have music playing. So yeah, it's actually, and that speaks to how pervasive music is, right? It's actually very difficult to find settings where music isn't playing. I was shocked that the elevators in McClelland Park don't have, you know, a little tune playing as you're going up. And there are campaigns out there to sort of reduce the amount of this environmental music that we're exposed to, because, you know, most of it can be really grating if you're trying to shop for groceries and there's a song playing and you hate that song, right? Or it's some music cover of a song that you really love, but they just destroyed it for you, right? Those things can be emotionally distressing. Yeah, really interesting comments. Thank you. We clearly have a lot to do with these data. This is very preliminary. We're currently getting similar data from a much broader community sample where hopefully we'll have more, much longer term relationships. We already can see in the data we've got more married couples, for instance. So we've got some depth to explore some demographic covariates in those data that we don't have with the college student data. And certainly our goal is to look at this longitudinally and to look at it experimentally. We're hoping to get people to come into the lab, strangers, and have them play music together or do other stuff together and see if we can find similar kinds of effects there. So that's the sort of close relational relationship stuff. When do people normally stop talking? Around 2?
Yeah.
Hours? Okay. So
Yeah. I think the technology is going to play into this. Because I'm thinking about my kids are both teenagers and they always have their earbuds in. You know what I mean? So then they're listening to something, we're listening to something else. The only time we make music is when we play rock band.
You know what I mean? Because we all, when we put it on the same, you don't get kicked off type mode or whatever. But I was just thinking about that, because then it's like, you could be together doing things, but if you're, yeah, you could be all listening to something completely different. I don't know where I'm going with that question, but.
You know, I'm fascinated by musical technology, and in a sort of slightly broader historical sense, in the fact that recorded music is only 120 years old or so. So before 1900, for the most part, if you wanted to listen to music, you had to play it yourself, or you had to go listen to someone play it live. That was it. Those were your options. And so the idea of music as a private experience was really very new for us as human beings. And the advent of the Walkman in 1980 or so, and headphones, that's even newer. And so for a species that has been playing music together for at least 36,000 years, the fact that in the course of 100 years, music has gone from being an inherently public, social, collective experience to being what for many people is inherently a private, individual, isolated experience is really weird. Really weird, I think. And yeah, so the extent to which we know how that's going to change stuff like this is yeah, I don't know. I think the way in which we worded our questions means that we're getting at people who are really listening to the same music at the same time together, not, yeah, I'm listening through my headphones and you're listening through yours, and we might sort of nod at each other every now and then, but we're listening to completely different music. Yeah, so that's what I'm getting at, and I think you're correct that there's opportunity with headphones. There may also be technological opportunities. I don't know to what extent with Bluetooth, you know, you can put something on your phone and two of you can listen to the same thing at the same time. Can you do that with Bluetooth? Because I remember when I first got a Walkman, I got one with 2 headphone jacks, and me and my girlfriend would both listen to the same stuff with our headphones on, but at the same time, right? And I don't know if technology has accommodated that kind of thing.
You do it on your PC. I mean, you can both listen to the same thing, not just the same thing.
Yeah, but with how most
If you
people,
have your music on your laptop or something.
yeah,
Or on that.
or you can have a splitter jack.
I was going to say that.
But is there a Bluetooth splitter? This is a technological question that I can probably answer on the internet. I need to ask you.
Okay. So I really like Linda's question, because I was thinking about when she was talking, like I liked how you started in terms of thinking about music as like this shared experience or this family experience. But one of the things that's kind of a rage now, at least in like I'll just stand up, couple and family relationships is like technoference, right? And so usually we think of cell phones in terms of technoference. But I'm almost wondering, given Linda's questions, if your headphones then can be used to be like, Mom, I'm not going to tell you about my day, and then like you literally just put in your headphones, and then communication ceases, right? So instead of like conversing like we would have, it actually maybe then the music interferes with parent-child relationships. Or you're mad at your partner and you're like, I'm just going to finish listening to this podcast or whatever.
Yeah.
So I almost wonder if you could do the flip side where in addition to it being like communicatively beneficial, I wonder if there's also instances where it could be negative or detrimental, especially with Linda's point about teenagers and their headphones.
Yeah. Well, and that's the distinction between shared musical activity and not shared musical
But like
activity.
purposely put it in your headphones and listen to your music so that you do not have to communicate with said parent, or said friend, or said romantic partner, or said boss.
You know, I'm going to guess some people in this room have engaged in the same form of active technoference when they get on an aircraft, for instance.
Sure.
Right? You
Savannah right away, yes.
Noise canceling headphones.
I was just going the other direction. I was thinking that, like, of a product you could sell. And I think it would be terrific for like, if you're like a divorce counselor, if you're doing arbitrations, to use this as a method to start to bring the parties into the same wave a little bit, and get them to at least be communicating, thinking, and sharing together. So I think there's a real positive in some pretty bad situations that this could be very beneficial.
Yeah, and Sandy and I, after the first study got published, the parent-child one, we got a number of calls from sort of parenting magazines, these kind of publications saying, you know, how do we encourage, should we encourage parents to listen to music with their kids? Yeah, why not, right? What harm is going to come of that? And developing some shared musical vocabulary with your kids so that it's not, well, my kids only listen to Kendrick Lamar and I only listen to the Beatles, and so we can never do this. It's like there's probably some middle ground you could find where you can use this to as a route to increasing understanding and providing, you know, I think music provides an important shared focus of attention for people, where it's an emotional experience that you are having together. And if you can find those, yeah, you don't have to like all the same music, but if you can find some music that is mutually enjoyable, that's a place where you can meet one another on some degree of common ground.
Maybe we can go first. Oh, okay. Thank you. Okay, thank you. So, one covariance I'm thinking about is the power dynamic of setting in a more intuitive way who choose the music to be played. So, intuitively, I'm thinking about if I'm the person who is always making the decision, then maybe a dominant person tend to be less empathetic. And also based on theories, whatever the communication adaptation theory or face threatening theory, whatever. So folks who have more power, so we said they have more right to make the decision, are less likely to accommodate the other person, and they may report a lower level of synchrony. So this is what I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think there are definitely sort of power implications there in relationships for who determines anything that goes on, right? Who determines which restaurant you go to, or which movie you go see, or which music you're listening to. Certainly my experience with couples is, in a lot of couples, there's one person who is just more into music than the other. And it may often be that person who determines what gets played, and the other person doesn't really mind. But yeah, I don't know how it would work if you got a couple where both of them are really into music, but they don't like the same music. That seems like a recipe for challenging relational negotiations that have to occur there. Yeah.
I have one more question.
Yeah.
I was just thinking about going back.
We're in synchrony, right?
Yes,
That's
we
at
are.
the end.
Because one of the things that I do is I listen to like my kids' music. So we always it's first your turn to play something in the car, then it's the next person, and things like that. But then I was thinking about what you said, and a lot of times I'll ask, like if they're having a bad day and the song that they play is really bad, I will say, what is it about this song that, you know what I mean, that helps you? And so in that way it's kind of, yeah. So, but I can also see how you wouldn't, but then I guess it depends.
Good point.
But, so I can see all sorts of fun things.
Well, you could have it both ways, right? Like I think about one of my previous advisees, Casey Totenhagen, she looked at daily hassles, and we always think that those are negative, but there's actually a scale where, like for example, you think about like childcare, and sometimes it's like a huge hassle, right? Like it's like time intensive, it's expensive, but sometimes it's also uplifting. So you could kind of have both, right? You could have communication, or excuse me, that music in terms of it being like beneficial for the relationship, but also like negative and isolating and awful, or whatever. Like I'm sure that that scaling could be done. So it's not just, it's always beneficial, it's always negative, but you could assess, like your scaling could be done so that you could look at, like I said in Casey's language, uplifts versus hassles or whatever the appropriate language would be for you. Because then that would get at what Linda's saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the talking about what you are getting out of the music is really interesting in terms of empathy and in terms of using, I mean, this goes back a little to what you were saying, using music as an entryway to understanding the other person and understanding the problems that are going on, where just talking about it maybe is not going to work, but the music provides that sort of first step in the door.
So one of the things that I was thinking of listening to you is not what you study, but it would be interesting to learn more about this. And it's with early childhood development and the influence of music and all the things that you list there in terms of synchronicity, coordination, and empathy, but not with others, but within the self and how that's developing. If you're just saying the toddler just innately has a rhythm, you watch them, they have rhythm. There's, music is learned as a way to soothe. There's repetition that helps with patterns. So there's all of those neurological things that are happening in terms of the development within that leads to that. It seems that that would be an interesting area of research.
Yeah, and that ability to track a beat, for instance, in music is bizarrely human. I mean, in the sense that other animals don't do this. Other animals are not able to listen to a piece of music and abstract something as simple as that, right? Parrots can do it. Look at Snowball, the dancing cockatoo. It's the best set of YouTube videos you'll ever see. So yeah, parrots and parrot-related animals can keep a beat, but most animals can't. So there is something sort of hardwired into human beings that allow us to develop music. And yeah, there's a huge literature on sort of the development of that in very early childhood.
Do they research how it influences the development of empathy? Is that something that they just thought that was? Because I could see it with others in terms of coordination, some other things, patterns, and that type of thing. That, developing not empathy with the other person, but how I even have empathy. Is there research on that and how music plays a role in it?
I'm not sure.
Not sure. Yeah.
There's some really interesting experimental work with young kids looking at sort of in-school musical activities and the role of those in developing empathy with other kids. But I'm not so sure about the sort of individual level of that.
I have a question. You mentioned ritual, right? So, what's the effect of music on the rituals? Don't you play music? What's the effect? Don't play drums. Second is, different rituals, different music is played, right? Marriage, prayers, a funeral, or basketball match. So, is there a particular genre to a particular event?
So yeah. So the first question, I think, goes in some sense to sort of sociological questions of why do we have rituals at all, right? And that rituals serve a function for us of understanding rules in society, I think, right? That there are appropriate ways to behave, and there are appropriate sequences with which things get done for us in a sociological sense. And having music as part of that, I think, just emphasizes the idea, yes, there are right types of music and there are wrong types of music for this particular event. Right? You don't play a really, really sad song at a wedding and don't play a really, really happy song at a funeral, right? That would always be the norm. And so music serves to reinforce that idea. I think the temporal sequence in the music is really important so that we learn to understand that things happen in time and that things are organized in time. And music emphasizes that more than pretty much anything else that we do because it's so organized in time. The question about sorry, the second part of your question was?
You answered that.
Oh, I
Second
did.
part. The first part is, if you don't play the music, how does it feel in a particular event?
Well, then you're doing it wrong, right? I mean, that's a mistake in the ritual. That would be the same as, you try to have anoint someone to be the King of England and he doesn't show up, right? I mean, the rituals require a set of elements, and so if one of them is missing, I think the ritual sort of doesn't happen. It's kind of failed. Does that get close?
Right, and its effect on the audience.
Confusion, disorientation. I mean, if you try to imagine a kid at the birthday party and you bring out the cake and the candles and nobody sings.
Right.
Poor child. I mean, that would be devastating, right? Doesn't matter if you've got the cake and everything. It's like something fundamental was missing. Do you have any ideas?
It reminds me of that episode of The Office, I don't know if anyone's seen it, but where they have her cake out and then the banner just says, "It is your birthday, period." And that's all the banner says, and they don't sing or anything. So it's just like thinking about how the song is a part of the meaning-making process.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I can understand how that would be super confusing. Everyone's just standing there like, okay.
And that if a ritual is a collective event, which almost by definition it is. I mean, maybe we can have individual rituals, but for the most part, we think rituals as collective events. Music offers that opportunity, and especially rituals where we all sing, or we all do some hand motions at the same time, right? Those rituals offer, those musical elements in the ritual offer an opportunity for all of us to be as one, and to, physically move as one, and to be emotionally moved as one. I love the fact that move has those two meanings, right? And when you get to music, being moved emotionally and moving physically, both occur simultaneously very often. And so music in a ritual does provide that opportunity. Even if you're all just sitting there and listening to the music, you are all kind of experiencing time together in a very, very organized and systematic way that I think probably adds power to the ritual in ways that you wouldn't have that experience without the musical elements. Yeah.
I'm curious to know if music with lyrics versus just instrumental music can have a different or similar effect on that communication, and like if music with lyrics influence the way people communicate versus music that doesn't necessarily have that meaning automatically put onto it, if that affects communication in a different way.
Oh man. I've been sort of mildly and not very systematically obsessed with that kind of question for a couple of years. So where to start? So first, I'm fascinated by the fact that we listen to so much vocal music where we have so little idea of what the lyrics actually are. I find that fascinating, and we'll even sing along. even though I don't actually know what the lyrics are, but I'm still singing along, which to me suggests that there's something really fundamental about just the human voice, and that even if we don't understand the lyrics, we want to hear a human voice with our music. Not that lots of us don't listen to lots of instrumental music, but you know, if you look at Spotify, I mean, the amount of Brahms violin concertos being heard versus the amount of Ariana Grande, right? Ariana won that battle. So I think just the voice is an emotionally very powerful stimulus. Then, you know, I think the lyrics, at least with good songwriting, right, you have the combination of the emotional aspects of the music combining with the emotional content of the lyrics. And so that's a really, really powerful combination. The other thing that lyrics I think are important for is that singing along together. So if you listen to a Brahms violin concerto, I don't know if he actually has any violin concertos, but let's assume he does, right? Or a Beethoven string quartet, I know those exist, right? You can both experience the music and the emotional power of that, and you can nod or tap your feet, but you can't really sing along unless you're sort of humming the violin line or something. But if you're listening to a song, you can both sing along with it together. And so the things you can do socially with music with lyrics are different from the things you can do with non-lyrical music. And certainly in concert settings, you know, if you go to Coachella or something, and you got 50,000 people standing there, all singing along to a particular song, that's an incredibly powerful collective experience that you can't have, even if there's 50,000 people listening to a Miles Davis concert or something. So those are some of my random thoughts about music and lyrics. Was there a specific question that I didn't actually answer?
No, it's just something that kind of popped into my head because, you know, yesterday I made a playlist for Valentine's Day for my fiance, and I specifically chose songs based on the lyrics. And so, and that was like my way of showing, like, I care about you and communicating that love to him. And so I was just curious because I didn't include any songs that were just instrumental.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that was just kind of where it came from.
And you also didn't send him any poems.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? So you wanted to send him that combination of music and lyrics. Yeah. Yeah, it's, you know, songs are just, there's clearly something very fundamental. I'm probably going back to that flute that we looked at that was 36,000 years old, right? What existed long before that flute was undoubtedly vocal music that humans were singing in some form or another with one another a long time before we were playing the flute. We were singing and we were probably playing drums or at least bashing sticks against tree trunks or whatever it may have been. We were creating rhythm by using objects around us, and we were creating melody through vocalizations of one sort or another.
There's still time for more.
I have one quick comment. So I have, thinking what Felicia said, so I have a data collection idea for you. So I go every year, every other, to the International Association for Relationship Research, IIRR, sound like we're pirates. And it's the most fun conference ever because like people are great and there's cocktails, but the #1 favorite thing of IIR is karaoke. So we do karaoke, like it's literally, not always, but it's almost always in the conference schedule. So like the editors of the journal show up, like the president of the organization shows up, and there is karaoke. And so you can literally see like the new scholars, and they're like, should I be standing up and singing Kesha? Yes, you should stand up and sing Kesha. because the senior people are standing up and singing Kesha, so it seems so much like a community building thing. So like if I had to choose financially which conference to go to, I would go to IAR because of karaoke. Because I feel like it brings us together, and then it's like a time for like the junior and senior scholars to get together and really like belong and come together and sing, and no one's good, so it's even more fun. So that could be a data collection. You should tell the chair, that you need funding to go to IAR so that you can collect these data at IAR, and then you can also have some cocktails during the cocktail hour.
At the Western States Communication Association,
Same thing?
they have a sock hop.
A sock hop?
A sock hop, which to me sounds like a term from like the 1950s maybe. But yeah, it's a dance essentially, and I think again, it's very disorienting for new people to show up at that conference, and you know, they've gone to panels all day, and then they walk into a room and it's like there's a DJ and all of these comm scholars are dancing very poorly. Yeah.
I love that, dancing very poorly. That's so funny.
So I was thinking of, it relates to what Melissa just said, sort of the consumerism. So you're interested in that because of the music. We went to Intel a couple of months ago, and they were talking about technology, because you also talked about walking into the store and you hate music. Well, they were talking about technology, and I don't know what the setting was or anything, but eventually being able to recognize you as a customer, maybe not you specifically as your name, but sort of your preferences, and having music that would be the volume of the music and the type of music playing sort of follow you around so that your experience as a consumer is more pleasurable and that you're more apt to make a purchase. And so that it's sort of, it's relating to our understanding of the human response to
There's some interesting sort of priming studies where if you play accordion music in a liquor store, people are more likely to buy the French wine.
Oh,
right. That's sort of
not a polka, but more like
yeah. If you play polka, maybe they buy the German beer. I don't know, right? But not as personalized as what you're describing. But again, that's sort of the environmental triggering of music.
A little scary, a little bit. I think that's going on, but it's part of the research that's happening around it.
I'm going to give you my contact information if any of you need it. There's also a link there. I did a talk downtown at the Fox Theater last year that was for a general audience, and so it's moderately entertaining, I guess I would say, but it's about similar aspects of music and social behavior, so you may enjoy that.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Lots of good ideas for what I need to do with my data analysis.